The son of the Whites has never liked me since I was little, but couldn't change the fate of marrying me. To protest, he left me at the wedding to go play car racing, and after marriage, he did all sorts of ridiculous things. I became a joke in the circle, and Jason enjoyed the show. Everyone thought I would tie Jason down for life, including him. On our 5th anniversary, I handed him a divorce agreement. He laughed and said, "Finally, I can get rid of you." That night, Jason went mad and smashed the wedding house bare-handed. During the yacht party, the most exciting scene unfolded. In the center of the crowd, Jason lazily sat on the sofa, a sweet-faced girl sitting on his lap, teasingly wrapping her arms around his neck. People raised their champagne glasses, urging them to kiss. The girl blushed, her eyes filled with desire. Jason squinted slightly, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. With a smirk, he said, "Come on, my wife is watching." Everyone turned to look at me, instantly quieting down. The girl sitting on Jason's lap glanced at me, showing no intention of getting up. She boldly held onto him, coyly saying, "Isn't this more exciting?" The scene immediately stirred up, with everyone eagerly anticipating the drama. My marriage with Jason was known to be a sham. Jason flaunted his promiscuity shamelessly, and the women around him weren't afraid of me, just a titled wife of Jason. I ignored her and looked straight at Jason. Calmly, I said, "The media is waiting at the harbor, are you coming back with me?" Jason smirked, unbothered. The girl saw the situation and became even more audacious, leaning into him, provocatively smiling at me. The flashes of the paparazzi cameras gleamed as speedboats approached. Cameras focused, shutters clicked, blinding flashes. I curled my fingers, feeling a sharp pain. Photographed again. I could foresee a storm awaiting me. Jason's mocking voice came from beside me, "Good, Emily." Suddenly he stood up, catching the girl off guard, causing her to fall to the ground. "Jason," she whimpered. Ignoring her, Jason walked over to me, his hand on my waist, leaning down. "Going back home?" he asked. I could see the malicious gleam in his eyes. He might not have much affection for the girl in his lap, but he intentionally let the paparazzi take those photos. He knew very well that if he caused a scandal, I would be the one punished. And he enjoyed playing these mischievous games. Without batting an eye, I held his hand on my waist and replied calmly, "Let's go." Jason chuckled briefly, full of sarcasm. I pretended not to hear and led him onto the speedboat. In public, I would always be the dignified and polite Emily. This marriage was an unavoidable fate. It wasn't until we reached home that I let go of his hand. Jason grabbed it back, intertwining our fingers tightly, tauntingly saying, "Keep up the act, Emily." I furrowed my brows, turned to look out of the window, letting him continue. That's how we arrived at the doorstep. Upon entering, Jason became even more shameless, raising our intertwined hands high, pressing my back against the wall. His dominant posture encroached, trapping me in his space. In the dim light, I saw his eyes gleaming with excitement. Exhausted, I whispered, "Jason, I'm tired today." Before I could finish speaking, he punished me by biting my collarbone. He sneered, "It's a marital duty, cooperate." I had no reason to refuse. Every time, Jason reminded me of my role as his wife, constantly asserting his dominance. Since I willingly accepted this bondage, I had no right to stop him. Thus, he could openly torment me. Jason was tireless deep into the night, yet I still woke up early out of habit. The other side of the bed was empty. We would sleep, but never together. Jason once joked bluntly, "I don't want to wake up and see your face immediately, it ruins my mood for the whole day." I stared at the ceiling for a few minutes, then picked up my phone. Opening Weibo, I inevitably saw the news from last night. Within minutes, it was trending. The photo showed the girl sitting on Jason's lap, with me standing across from them. The comments section was lively, as usual. Just as I was about to exit social media, the trending topic disappeared. Jason's PR team was awake. I came back from my morning run, and Jason was awake too. Leaning lazily against the counter with a cup of coffee, his robe loose, his robust chest muscles enticingly displayed. He raised his eyes drowsily, smirked unreservedly, and said, "If only I had known you had such stamina last night." Jason. Knowing his character well, I interrupted calmly, "We're leaving in 30 minutes. Jason had a strong family concept, requiring family members to return home every Sunday no matter how busy they were. This was an iron rule. Even someone as loose as Jason didn't dare to break it. With a playful smirk, he said, "Good luck then." I knew what he meant and went upstairs to freshen up. On the way back, Jason was constantly playing on his phone, quietly watching the scenery outside. I prepared for the impending storm. When the car pulled into the mansion, Jason put away his phone and got out without a word, heading straight for the main hall. Upon entering, he lounged lazily on the sofa, unconcerned. His grandmother, amused by something he said, had a bright smile. "Grandma," I politely greeted her. She nodded gently and said, "Your parents are waiting for you in the study, go see them." Okay. I knew what would happen. Jason, the instigator of all this, wore a faint smile without even lifting his eyelids. After leaving the study, I had a fresh slap mark on my face, the taste of blood faintly seeping from the corner of my mouth. Jason's mother was very particular. When she hit someone, she hit the face. After striking, she resumed her elegant and noble demeanor. Every word dripped with sophistication and condescension. "Emily, you have disappointed me greatly. A woman who can't even hold her husband's heart, and indulges his nonsense, is that acceptable?" I'm running out of patience. Standing in the doorway of the study, I could faintly hear their conversation inside. Jason's father, who was silent until then, said, blaming her for the mess your son made, "Is that fair? Who else would you blame if not her? Before Jason married her, although mischievous, he wasn't that outrageous." She complained, "You all forced him to marry a woman he doesn't love, and now he's the one suffering, not me." Jason's father sighed, "It was your grandpa who arranged this marriage, there's nothing I can do about it. I only have one son." He paused, "I just want him to be happy and not be tied down by a woman he doesn't love." I walked away. As I crossed the long corridor, Eric suddenly came to mind. The pain in my lips seemed to spread to my heart, making me feel inexplicably uncomfortable. At the end of the corridor, with the window wide open, Jason leaned against the windowsill with his arms folded, a half-burnt cigarette between his fingers. Outside the window, the green tree branches swayed in the spring breeze, his face shrouded in backlight, unclear and mysterious. Just as I was about to pass by in silence, my wrist was grabbed. Jason's hand with the cigarette grazed my lip, and he chuckled softly, "You're fighting back this time." The smoke stung my eyes, and I awkwardly pushed his hand away. Jason put the cigarette to his lips, his narrow eyes looking at me with a smirk, his sharpness hiding behind a mischievous smile. "Emily, don't you know how to resist?" His deep voice with a lazy smile, void of any emotion. I chuckled back, "Do I even have the right to resist?" Jason didn't say anything. When the cigarette burnt out, he extinguished it on the ashtray by the window. "True." His tone was calm, yet firm, "It's all you're doing, you should be the one to suffer." He left decisively. When Jason leaves at a time like this, there's no doubt his family will blame me under the guise of teaching the ways of a husband and wife. There was arrogant belittlement, both overt and covert. I accepted it all calmly. Some debts can always be repaid, and some people, in this lifetime, will eventually be gone. Leaving Jason's house, I had the driver take me to the sanatorium as usual. Halfway there, I received a call from the sanatorium. "Emily, your mother's condition is not good, please come as soon as you can." I tightly gripped my phone, my heart sinking. Rushing into the ward, I saw a woman on the sickbed, a shadow of her former self, my eyes instantly filled with unbearable bitterness. "What's going on?" "When I was here a few days ago, she was clearly improving." The nurse couldn't look at me. "I'm sorry, Emily, I wasn't paying attention, your mother saw it on the internet." Over these years, even if Jason had just stabbed me in the chest a moment ago, when I saw her, I could still talk about Jason with a blush on my face, speaking of him with a shy and happy demeanor. I had been acting very well all this time. She struggled to lift her hand. I grabbed her hand, choked up and said, "Mom." She soothingly patted my hand, her cloudy eyes welling up with tears. Mom regrets forcing you. Back then, I thought you and that boy who grew up together, and since you liked him so much, I thought I had found you the best match, never thought. She spoke a lot, her breathing heavy and ragged. I wiped away her tears, gently soothing her. Mom, let's not dwell on the past. The Whites never wanted to acknowledge this marriage, and Jason, treating you like this, you must have had it tough, right? Her tears kept flowing. No. I smiled. I am now famous and wealthy, don't mention how comfortable I am. She looked at me for a long time, turned her head away reluctantly. I'm sorry, Mom. The atmosphere was so suffocatingly silent after a while, she timidly asked, can you let Jason come see me? In an instant, my heart felt like it was being pierced by needles, a dense and unbearable pain spreading. Okay. I walked to the door and called Jason on my phone. One call after another, but all met with silence. I called his office. The secretary said, Jason left for a trip to Africa after leaving home, his flight hasn't landed yet. What is he going to do? They said he went hunting. I held the phone in silence for a long time. My mother was faintly conscious, occasionally waking up and asking, where's Jason? I struggled to call Jason over and over again, sending message after message. As the spring night grew long and Jason didn't show up, on this lonely and hard-to-speak spring night, I lost my mother forever. Thanks to my role as Jason's wife, our family organized a grand funeral for her. When the funeral was over, Jason called. I didn't answer, letting the phone ring and go silent repeatedly. The next day, I went home to quietly pack up my mother's belongings. After being sick for so many years, her room was already covered in dust. People gone, things old. In the evening, someone pushed open the door, stood silently for a long time, then left without a sound. I didn't turn back, indifferently saying, Jason, I don't want to see you right now. The person behind me stayed quiet, stood there for a while, then left. I sorted through my mother's belongings, took care of everything, only taking a thick photo album with me. Passing through the living room, the whole family was gathered around a boy of about 10 years old. He didn't look very happy, and the family was trying to cheer him up with kind words. When they saw me standing at the staircase, they awkwardly stopped smiling. My father waved at me, and a woman with a beautiful face quickly took the boy away. Emily. He pointed to the table full of dishes, inviting me to stay for a meal before leaving. No, thank you. I looked at him quietly, as if overnight, my hatred towards him had vanished. Dad. I called out softly, this is the last time I'll call you Dad. The man's face instantly turned cold. What did you say? I ignored him, smiling to myself. I don't owe you anything anymore. Used to my gentle and obedient behavior, he found it hard to accept suddenly. Are you setting boundaries with us? Yes. I coldly turned around. Emily. He thundered in anger, grabbing an ashtray on the way. The wind whistled behind me, my vision went dark, and then I was embraced by someone. The ashtray hit the person's shoulder with a muffled sound, as I looked up dazed, meeting Jason's profound and menacing eyes. Jason, the one who caused the accident, was speechless. Jason didn't even look at him, just grabbed me and walked away. Back in the car, neither of us said a word. In the dim night, shadows of trees danced through the car window. Amid the silence, Jason took out a cigarette and lit it without actually lighting it. He lowered his eyebrows and said, sorry, didn't turn on my phone after we got out. As far as I can remember, this is the first time Jason has sincerely apologized in the 5 years of our marriage. In the past, his apologies were always insincere, just to annoy me. He has the free spirit of the African savannah, unwilling to be restrained by the mundane world. According to his wife's script, I should have shown understanding. But at that moment, I was too upset to respond to him at all. Jason furrowed his brow, not lighting the cigarette, then took it out and crushed it in irritation, his knuckles turning white from the force. Emily, can you? Just then, the phone suddenly rang, cutting off Jason's words. He seemed to be inexplicably angry, with nowhere to vent. Answering the phone, he snapped, are you out of your mind? In the confined space, the girl's clear and lively voice was clearly audible from the receiver. Jason. She showed no fear. With a slightly higher tone of voice, filled with coquettishness, she continued, "You left me alone in Africa. What do you call that?" Impatiently, Jason raised an eyebrow. "You had it coming. Jason, you have no heart." The girl accused indignantly, "I don't care, come and pick me up." "What do you think you're doing?" Jason sneered lightly. "You can try going back by yourself." She persisted, "If you don't, I'm going to your wife, you better not regret it." At these words, Jason's gaze narrowed and a hint of a smile appeared on his face, giving his whole face a cold aura. His casual response belied his true feelings, "Sure." The girl seemed unsure of his intentions for a moment and her arrogance decreased slightly. "I'm not threatening you, just so you know." Just then, Jason opened the car door, walked leisurely to the side, put the phone at his shoulder, tilted his head, and lit a cigarette. The sound of his footsteps faded away, and the wind rushed in through the partially open window. "Karina, Jason's secretary, called me, Emily. Jason is in hot search again." The fact that Jason took that call told me everything. During the 10+ days he spent in Africa, he had a girl by his side. Rumors were now spreading, which was not surprising. I opened the social media platform. In the photos, Jason was playing with a hunting rifle, and the daring and hot girl was by his side, the two of them close together. I recognized that girl from the photos. Lily, born on Wall Street, was flamboyant and bold. She and Jason were truly birds of a feather. He did whatever he wanted to do, and no one could stop him. The next day, we arrived at the cemetery. When Jason reached over to unbuckle my seatbelt, he said, "I can go by myself." Watching his dejected figure disappear into the shadows of the graveyard, I thought, Jason could be quite puzzling at times. The phone rang without warning. Jason had left his phone in the center console. I glanced at the screen and saw Lily's name. No one picked up, but she kept calling repeatedly, the ringtone echoing in the car. Irritated, I put on my earphones and closed my eyes. I didn't notice when Jason got back into the car. A cool sensation touched my earlobe as I opened my eyes to see Jason taking my earphones. "Your phone was ringing for a while," I explained instinctively. Jason raised an eyebrow, his long fingers fidgeting with the earphones. His mood didn't seem quite right, and I had nothing to say. The car fell silent. Jason took out a cigarette, shook one out, and put it in his mouth. He opened the car window, flicked the cigarette, and said, "I remember when I used to run to your house to eat noodles." I quickly glanced at him. Surprisingly, Jason still remembered that bowl of noodles. I remembered my mother and replied lightly, "You could eat 3 bowls in one go." Jason raised an eyebrow disdainfully, "Who's as picky as you? 2 chopsticks of noodles were enough for you." I pursed my lips, unable to argue. Back then, my mom's cooking was really lacking, and the only dish she could showcase was a bowl of noodles. I had gotten tired of eating it, praying every meal it wasn't noodles. But after Jason praised it, my mom was over the moon. She warmly invited Jason to come over more often for dinner. Jason didn't hesitate, and soon noodles became a staple at our home. I had lost my appetite, but now I couldn't turn it down. Jason brushed the cigarette ash out of the window with his long arm. Regret tinged his voice as he said, "I won't be able to eat them anymore." Memories of my mother's passing flooded my mind, and I fell silent for a moment. It had been a long time since Jason and I had such a relaxed and affectionate atmosphere between us. Perhaps because he missed my mother's funeral, Jason temporarily restrained his carefree attitude as the phone rang again. Jason sat back in the driver's seat, the phone to his ear, steering with one hand. Just as the car started moving, the girl's clear voice came through the speaker. She was angry, demanding boldly, "Jason, where are you?" Jason had connected his phone to the car's Bluetooth and forgotten to switch to hands-free mode. I knew it was Lily. He made no effort to hide it from me, answering lazily, "Where?" The call was hastily made by someone in a hotel, sounding tired after a long flight. Lily had returned to China. I put my headphones back on and turned up the volume. The call ended quickly, and Jason looked at me through the rearview mirror, his lips moving slightly. I could tell from his lips that he asked if I was going home. I closed my eyes and replied. Jason accelerated the car suddenly, and I was caught off guard, leaning forward due to the inertia. I opened my eyes in surprise and saw his confident face in the rearview mirror. He was focused on the road ahead, with a slightly mischievous smile clearly visible. Jason dropped me off at the doorstep, turned the car around, and quickly disappeared at the end of the road. After standing for a moment, I turned and entered the house. These days, I quietly bid farewell to my mother. But in the silent nights, the grief crept in relentlessly. Before, even though my mother was ill and living in a nursing home for a long time, I still had somewhere to go. Now, I couldn't find that sense of home anywhere. This lavish and empty house felt like nothing more than a luxurious prison. My internal clock, honed over the years, woke me up at 6 o'clock sharp. I must have cried unconsciously in my sleep, with dried tears on my face. I sat quietly, sorting through all my emotions, and then got up. Seeing the figure at the window, my footsteps hesitated as I went downstairs. The night in spring was long, and the slightly tipsy sky outside the window cast fragmented shadows on him, crisscrossing between light and darkness. He had just woken up, still in his pajamas. Your expression, Jason turned his head slightly, intriguing. I walked to the bar and poured a glass of warm water, calmly saying, I thought you weren't coming back last night. He seemed genuinely surprised. Don't you need to stay at the hotel with someone? Jason teased, are you planning to catch someone in bed? I almost choked on the water after hearing that. In the past, as long as Jason didn't go too far, I wouldn't interfere. But his years of mischief always made headlines with one scandal after another. And I was the one who ended up becoming a joke. He was carefree, but his family would blame me in the end. I knew that every time I went out to find him in the midst of revelry, I annoyed him. But what else could I do? As long as I was still his wife, I had to clean up after him. That was not my intention. As the bittersweet taste of the warm water went down, I reminded him, be discreet, just don't get caught. Jason, with a smirk in the rising smoke, squinted and said, sorry, I'm naturally high profile. I had no more to say. I finished the water and went out for my morning run. After finishing and freshening up, I met Jason in the garage heading to the office. He furrowed his brows, saying, Emily, the company allows bereavement leave. I nodded. I know. 15 days, and today is the last day. Jason looked at me thoughtfully. Suddenly bending down, he placed his hand on my shoulder, lightly brushing the back of his fingers against my neck. It tickled. I removed his hand, saying, you're going to be late. We're lucky to have a daughter-in-law like you, even the ancestors are pleased, Jason said casually. I had nothing to reply, so I left in the car. As I drove a short distance, a blue sports car zoomed by, disappearing into the traffic. Jason rested his elbow on the window frame, and I raised my eyebrows. Is he treating the highway as a racetrack? With work piling up for the past few weeks, I buried myself in a pile of documents as soon as I entered the office. Karina, the secretary, half opened the door and peeked inside. Emily, Jason wants you to come to his office. I knew it wasn't going to be good news. Despite being psychologically prepared, I still felt uneasy when I pushed open the door. Jason was lounging in his chair, with a woman sitting in front of him at his long desk, swinging her fair legs freely. She was facing Jason, so I couldn't see her face. Just judging from her provocative attire, I could guess it was Lily. I looked at Jason. You wanted to see me? Jason raised his jaw slightly towards me, eyebrows raised. My wife is here. As soon as I heard his tone and the term he used, I felt a headache coming on. Trouble was brewing. I didn't expect Lily to actually come looking for me. Lily turned her head, her gaze sweeping up and down me. Brazenly nice to see you again, she said with a bold and bright smile, showing no sign of embarrassment. It was as if she was sitting with her husband. I couldn't help but smile a little. Upon seeing her before, I always felt anxious, thinking that Jason treated her differently from other girls. But now, meeting her again, I didn't see much of a difference between her and the other women by Jason's side. It seemed my perspective had changed. "Hello," I replied politely. She turned her body agilely, leaning her chin on her hand. "In less than 5 years, Emily has already become an elite." She winked mischievously. "I heard you've been promoted to vice president. Did you pull some strings with Jason for the position?" I smiled faintly. "I guess I took the back door." Surprisingly, I felt quite calm, which seemed to surprise Lily. Jason let out a deep chuckle from his throat. Leaning back in his chair, he propped his head with the back of his hand, looking at me with appreciation. I lowered my eyes. "Jason." Lily seemed dissatisfied, so I decided to leave. "I should go." Jason gave me a meaningful look as I turned to leave. Lily, however, insisted, "Don't go just yet." As I kept walking, she followed me with a voice that carried a smile tinged with malice. I turned slightly, asking, "Is there something else?" She wanted to cause trouble, and Jason allowed it. Did they bring me here just to satisfy her whims? "There's nothing," Lily said with a coquettish smile. "I just wanted to tell you that Jason was with me during his time in Africa." Her statement felt oddly familiar. One day, after marrying Jason, I received a message from an overseas number. It was short and to the point, just one line: "During Jason's 4 years in the United States, I was the one he was with. Who do you think you are?" I read that message repeatedly, feeling like my heart was being torn apart. At that time, I didn't reply to the message, but now I feel calm about it. What am I? Childhood sweetheart? Arranged marriage wife? I coldly nodded. "I know. Is my sister-in-law so open-minded?" "Exactly." She understandingly said, "In a marriage of convenience, it's just a matter of interests. Who would be foolish enough to have real feelings?" Her implication was clear. I am just a marriage tool. She and Jason are the ones with real feelings. I was the first to come, but ended up becoming the third person in someone else's relationship. I couldn't help but smile. "You're right." The smile on Lily's face was beginning to fade. She tried so hard to provoke me, but it felt like punching cotton, leaving her unsatisfied. I ignored her, turned my head, and immersed myself in work. On Saturday morning, Jason still hadn't come home. I picked up my phone and sent Jason a message: "Meet me at the villa gate at 10 o'clock. Can't be lovey-dovey, but both need to show up." As usual, Jason didn't reply to the message. However, he shouldn't be absent. I arrived on time, and within a few minutes, Jason's car came speeding towards me. In the passenger seat of the sports car, Lily, in a restrained ladylike attire, was a stark contrast to her usual flamboyant self. As the car passed by, she waved at me. "Emily, good morning." I never expected Jason to be so outrageous this time, daring to openly bring someone home. After Grandpa passed away, the rest of the Whites couldn't control Jason's misbehavior outside and could only turn a blind eye. But the Whites prided themselves on their upright family background, and they would never allow affairs like this to happen. Jason took long strides and walked in. I raised my step without hurry, and Lily followed behind carrying bags of gifts. "Could you help me see if Jason's family will like these gifts?" she asked. Ignoring her desire, I walked in by myself. Lily persisted. "I heard his parents don't really like you. Do you think they will like me?" Only then did I slightly pause in my steps. I looked her up and down, from head to toe. Lily smiled, waiting for my response. I gave a faint smile, remained silent, and continued walking. She seemed to think I was challenging her, and unwilling to fall behind, she hurried to overtake me and entered first. Mrs. White, draped in a shawl, elegantly descended the stairs from upstairs. Seeing Lily and me walking in one after the other, and then glancing at Jason lounging on the sofa, playing with a teacup lazily, she understood what was going on. I lowered my eyelids quietly, not wanting to get involved. Lily put on a sweet smile. "Auntie, I'm Emily, nice to meet you for the first time. This is a small gift I prepared for you, I hope." "It is indeed small, Mrs. White interrupted without any coldness in her tone. Lily's smile froze. Today is a family banquet, no reception for guests. Mrs. White looked at the butler. Escort the guest out. Yes, madam. The butler gestured to see Lily off. Emily, take care. Lily never expected it to turn out like this, feeling embarrassed and at a loss, her face turning red and then pale. With a touch of injustice, she called out, Jason. Jason, slouched on the sofa, playing with the teacup, didn't even lift an eyelid. I suddenly felt a bit sorry for Lily. As indifferent as Jason was, his favor was like a flower in the mirror, a moon in the water. Charming, but not meant to be real. When Lily left, her eyes held tears of humiliation. Her presence didn't cause any ripples in the atmosphere of the family banquet. Only Grandma raised her cane and lightly tapped Jason's arm. Be more restrained, don't bring such people home, it bothers me, she said, gently. Jason leaned back lazily, feigning innocence. You're wronging me. Even if she wanted to come, you couldn't have stopped her, right? That's right. Jason raised his eyebrows nonchalantly. Can I not lay a hand on a woman? Grandma couldn't argue with him and just gave him a stern look. Then she kindly waved at me. Emily, come sit next to Grandma. Perhaps Jason had gone too far this time. Grandma spent quite some time consoling me. I listened meekly, playing the role of a proper granddaughter-in-law. After she finished talking to me, she turned to Jason and changed the subject. You need to settle down. It's been almost 5 years since you got married, yet there's no sign of children. What are you waiting for? Jason jokingly responded, so if I settle down, can I have a child on my own? My brows furrowed deeply. At that moment, Jason glanced over with a teasing and provocative look. Before Grandma could shift the conversation to me, I stood up casually. Grandma, I'll go to the bathroom. I took my time before finally walking into the living room. Thick carpets covered the floor, making footsteps sound ethereal. Grandma was still talking to Jason. Emily is a good girl, don't mess around, Jason mockingly remarked. A good girl deserves a good man, too bad she's married to me. You know best. Grandma didn't mince her words, cooling off the atmosphere, but leaving him without a wife. Annoyed, Jason reached for the cigarette box on the tabletop and walked out. Casually, I sat back down next to Grandma, as if I hadn't heard anything. I stayed until evening when Grandma's rest time came, and then we all dispersed. I had driven there myself, regardless of Jason leaving first. Driving for a while, I saw Jason's car in the rearview mirror. This time, he didn't rush to overtake, patiently following my car all the way back to our marital home. There was no need to meet and talk, so I went straight upstairs to wash up. Drying my hair and coming out of the bathroom, I was caught off guard to see Jason leaning against the wall. The room was dark, with a faint light shining through the bathroom frosted glass onto his body in a hazy manner. With his robe collar slightly open, revealing a hint of his neck and chest muscles, he exuded a subtle sexiness. I remained silent. What's wrong? Came in but won't speak, just listening to someone shower, Jason said, his eyes filled with a certain desire. I clenched my fist holding the towel. Is there something you need? At his words, Jason chuckled, his throat rolling as he let out a low laugh. He reached out boldly, hooked my neck, leaned down, and stared into my eyes. What do you think? Avoiding his gaze, I stayed silent. Jason's restless fingers fiddled with the collar of my shirt. You heard too, today. His warm breath tickled my shoulder and neck as he teasingly said, Grandma mentioned she wants a grandchild. As a chill ran down my spine, I held on to Jason's hand. Jason, that's enough, I said, trying to stop him. Claiming it was his marital duty, Jason persisted. But when he sensed my cold resistance, his aggressive actions came to a halt. He pulled back, towering over me with a deep stare. After a moment, he smirked and said, Emily, can't keep up the act anymore? I pressed my lips together and honestly replied, I don't want to pretend anymore. His smile faded as he narrowed his eyes, a hint of coldness creeping in. We stood there in silent confrontation. The tension was about to explode from the pent-up emotions when suddenly Jason turned on his heel and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. With water droplets from his damp hair falling on the back of his hand, the wild roar of his racing car could be heard from downstairs. Jason had left. I quietly turned and walked to the balcony. This 3-story villa was a generous gift from Jason's grandfather for our marriage. Located in the prime location, the balcony offered a clear view of the beautiful river below. I stood there silently, like I had for over 1,800 nights before. Letting the spring night breeze carry away the dampness from my hair, the long and quiet riverside road stretched into the distance with faint lights glowing in the night. A sports car turned into a streak of light in the darkness, racing off into the distance. A thought popped into my head: what a mood killer. I knew Jason well. When he was upset, he always found something to vent his frustrations. Like at our wedding, he abandoned me to go play racing cars. Acting reckless, almost like he didn't care about his own life. It frightened his companions, who hurriedly called his father. His father personally went to bring him back. At that time, his grandfather was still alive, and he didn't indulge Jason's behavior. He gave him a particularly harsh beating that no one dared to stop. Jason was stubborn, kneeling on the ground with a straight back, not saying a word. Refusing to back down. In the end, it was me who held him back, shielding his grandfather's cane with my body. His grandfather couldn't hold back his strength, hitting me on the shoulder. I winced in pain, meeting Jason's dark, fierce gaze. "Emily, get out of my way," he said. The rumble of the racing car echoing from a distance, Jason had vented his anger and quieted down. The car parked by the riverside road. Squinting slightly, I could vaguely make out a figure standing by the car. In the night, his figure was outlined against the quiet backdrop, head bowed while lighting a cigarette. The flame flickered and died out, leaving a hint of crimson on his fingertips. In countless quiet years, I had watched him walk away with various emotions in my heart. Now, looking back, I felt no ripples in my heart. Even the resentment I had for him because of my mother's passing had disappeared. In the end, there was nothing left. March 28th, our wedding anniversary. A high society marriage as it was, a kind of glamorous social performance. Usually, the Whites would host a grand banquet on this day. Jason and I would play the loving couple, freezing fairy tale moments in the media's lenses. It was well known that the White sons' marriage was orchestrated by the company's PR department. Our happiness relied on their image-building efforts. While internet users enjoyed Jason's constant rumors of changing girlfriends, they were forced to admire the fake love of the high society couple. With a few days to go until our 5th anniversary, the company's planning team called me. "Mrs. Emily, we've arranged everything for your and Jason's 5th anniversary activities according to instructions. The schedule has been sent to your email." A man's voice came over the phone. I listened without responding. "The gift you want to give Jason will be delivered to you on the day." I finally agreed with Jason's words. This marriage had been a drama from start to finish. And Jason and I were the leads. I smirked. "No need, this year I'll choose the gift myself." "This?" He hesitated for a moment, but eventually agreed. As the call was about to end, he deliberately added, "You and Jason really have great chemistry." He also said he wants to choose his own gift this year. "You two are so in sync." I quietly smirked, finding it somewhat amusing. When it came to anniversary events, Jason was always particularly cooperative. Under the flashlights, he made intentional or unintentional intimate gestures that lacked the wild and rogue qualities seen in scandalous photos, filled instead with tender affection. But during a hug, his lips deliberately traced my neck. In a lowered voice full of mockery, he said, "Mrs. Emily, you're acting quite well." I kept smiling, the deep affection in my eyes under the flashlights a mix of truth and pretense. "How do you know it's all an act and not genuine?" Jason aggressively hugged me tighter, forcing me against his chest. "Your broken heart sounds a lot louder than your loving gaze." Every muscle in my body tensed as Jason exerted pressure. Under the overwhelming flashlights, we were like two trapped beasts silently struggling with each other. There was a name we couldn't avoid: Eric. The banquet was set for 8 o'clock. Karina received instructions to bring the makeup and styling team to the bridal suite. My makeup and gown had to perfectly match this persona. I had no choice in the matter. As I descended the stairs, Jason was already waiting there. Leaning against the car, he casually glanced at his phone, dressed in a proper, straight-cut suit that exuded a hint of aristocratic nonchalance. Upon hearing footsteps, he raised his gaze, paused on me, but didn't say a word. It had been some time since we had seen each other since that night. Sometimes we'd cross paths at the office, exchange polite greetings, and Jason would respond with indifference. We maintained a silent, eerie calm between us. "Let's go," I said calmly, getting into the car. No one spoke as the silence engulfed us inside the car. When we arrived, I instinctively took Jason's arm, seemingly surprised by my calm demeanor. He glanced at me. I looked at the entrance of the banquet, raised the most standard smile. The leading couple should walk in hand together. Jason suddenly grasped my hand, interlocking our fingers tightly. Our intertwined fingers, as he exerted pressure, made our palms pressed closely together. I slowly raised my head, meeting his dark and deep eyes. "Jason, everyone is waiting for us." The 5th anniversary celebration organized by his family was more grandiose than ever before. Walking with Jason, I greeted each guest gracefully and flawlessly throughout the night. The cake cart was slowly pushed into the venue, and the performance reached its climax. Unlike previous years, Jason didn't present any high-end jewelry prepared by his team. These things were not new, but their expensive price tags and dazzling brilliance were enough to attract everyone's attention. This year, Jason's gift was a simple violin. At a glance, I could tell that this violin was no ordinary one. Despite its rich history, it was still being maintained in such good condition, making it a coveted treasure among connoisseurs. Jason must have put in a lot of effort to find it. It turned out that he still remembered my childhood dream. I touched the strings of the violin. "It's been a long time since I played the violin. I'm afraid I won't live up to such a treasure." Jason looked at me meaningfully, his voice low. "It's never too late." In my heart, I replied, but my expression remained unchanged. I took the gift box from the staff and handed it to Jason. This year's gift was personally chosen by me. Not only the gift, but I also hand-picked the gift box and even tied a big red bow on it. Jason lowered his eyes, looking at it for a few seconds, seemingly moved, and was about to open it right there. I tiptoed, hooked my arm around his neck, and embraced him. Like every anniversary in the past, we hugged. We whispered sweet words to each other with smiles. "I suggest you not to open it now." Jason's body tensed. My breath grazed his ear. "I'm not acting anymore." The moment I said these words, it was as if all the long-standing heaviness and darkness in my heart had been lifted away. Finally, at that moment, I was no longer my parents' daughter, no longer Jason's wife. Just Emily. Jason's other hand that was hanging at his side suddenly gripped my waist tightly. I smiled in relief. "Jason, I can finally let you go." The banquet was still ongoing, but Jason was nowhere to be seen. The lead actors' roles had been perfectly finished, and I calmly left the scene. I guess I can consider myself a girl who sees things through to the end. Getting married on this date and getting divorced on the same date. 5 years, complete, not a day more or less. Karina was driving, frequently glancing in the rearview mirror. Jason's car had been following behind all this time. I didn't even have the desire to look back, forget about him. There was heavy traffic now, and his aggressive pursuit might lead to. Karina seemed worried. Let him be. As soon as I stepped inside the house, I heard the roar of a car engine, accompanied by the sharp sound of tires screeching against the ground, piercing through the night. Jason grabbed my wrist from behind. The force holding my wrist was strong, making my bones ache. I didn't struggle, enduring it. Jason's tone was devoid of its usual nonchalance, terrifyingly calm. Is this real or fake? This was the fierce calm before the storm. Are you asking about what I said or the divorce agreement? I stood facing away from Jason, sincerely asking and answering myself. Both were real. The pressure on my wrist gradually loosened, and Jason withdrew his hand. The air fell into a suffocating silence. A few minutes later, Jason suddenly sneered, his casual tone relaxing but ice-cold. Emily, who are you to bring up divorce with me? I turned my head to look at him but ultimately said nothing. If he said I didn't have the right, then I didn't. No lights were on around us, only a faint cold moonlight coming through the side window panes. Jason stood straight there, the moonlight spread on the ground shattered under his soundless steps. Although visibly furious, his eyes still held a mix of coldness and mocking nonchalance. "Emily, did you marry me because of a forced alliance, to atone, but not because of me? These years, you've been playing the role of a bridge between your family and mine, atoning for your sins, always submissive and never rebellious. Now that the debts are paid, the sins atoned for, do you want to kick me aside?" He let out a low laugh, as if he heard a joke. I blinked, finding the situation somewhat humorous as well. As Jason suppressed his laughter, he lowered his eyelids and slowly tore apart the divorce agreement he had clenched in his hand. He seemed to be tearing it effortlessly, but his knuckles turned white. I let him tear it, not intervening. Perhaps my silence further provoked him. Suddenly, Jason raised his hand, and the shredded paper rained down from above me, the thin edges brushing against my face, creating a faint stinging sensation. I didn't move, enduring his anger. Jason's lips curled into a cold smile. "Emily, don't even think about it." Finally, when Jason left, his anger was completely unleashed. He slammed the door fiercely, making a loud noise and left. Karina, holding the violin, stood outside trembling. "Come in." I lightly brushed off the fragments on me. "Him?" Karina was shocked by this unfamiliar side of Jason. "It's okay, he won't come back." I reassured her, indicating the bar. "Get yourself a drink, I'll pack things up, wait for me here." Taking the violin she handed me, I walked upstairs briskly. I began to gather the things I planned to take with me. While picking up the photo album left by my mother, a photo suddenly fell out from inside. I picked it up and looked at it, feeling a bit lost. The photo was taken when I was 5 years old. I'm wearing a snow-white princess dress, with eyes curved like a crescent moon when I smile. Standing on my left and right are 2 little boys. They look like they were cut from the same mold, but their personalities are completely different. One is gentle and quiet, smiling calmly at the camera, while the other is cool and aloof, looking unwilling. One is Eric, the other is Jason. As I looked at the photo for a long time, thoughts of Jason's words came to mind, and I caught a glimpse of the grim claws of fate. Ever since I can remember, Jason hasn't liked me. My grandfather and Jason's grandfather were comrades in arms, and it is said that if it weren't for my grandfather, his grandfather would have long been buried in a foreign land. So, the relationship between our 2 families was as solid as a mountain. When we were young, they discussed arranging a marriage between us. Eric and Jason, being twins, they found it hard to choose. Grandpa teased me, "Which brother do you like? Pick one, Grandpa will give him to you." I looked at the 2 identical little lords in confusion. After a while, I pecked Jason's cheek. His face turned red, and he rubbed the spot where I kissed him vigorously, grumbling, "You little rascal." I pointed at his face and asked, "Still hurts?" Yes, I kissed him because he had scratches on his face. Every time I got hurt, adults would kiss my wounds, saying it would make the pain go away. So, I kissed Jason as well. But he didn't appreciate it. "Mind your own business," he grumbled sternly. I cried and ran into my mother's arms, while the adults couldn't stop laughing. And that's how the engagement was settled. In their words, we looked like little enemies. They say that enemies are bound to meet, and we were a perfect example of that. However, only half of what they said was true. Jason and I were indeed enemies, but not a perfect match. Jason was the king of mischief from a young age, leading a group of kids to make trouble wherever they went. He always teased me, rolled in the mud and then threw mud at my princess dress. I pouted and almost cried, but he found it hilariously funny. Unlike Jason, Eric was completely different. He was afraid of me crying, and would gently console me, taking me home to change clothes. In kindergarten, I always had candies in my pocket, and when I shared them with Eric, he would smile happily. When I offered them to Jason, he would dismissively say, "I'm not interested." In elementary school, I once copied Eric's homework, and Jason didn't hesitate to report me to the teacher. He passed by me and exclaimed smugly, "Serves you right." In middle school, during a hot summer day on the playground, Jason, sweating profusely, ran over to me and glared, "Emily, if you don't shut up, I'll get you." I was so scared that I swallowed the words. "Jason, go for it." In high school, as feelings began to blossom, a girl asked me to help her pass a love letter to Jason. I felt conflicted. From a young age, the adults had told me that once I grew up, would marry Jason. So, I felt somewhat possessive and believed Jason shouldn't receive love letters from anyone else. When someone sent me a love letter, Jason retaliated by throwing it in the trash in front of them. After that incident, no one dared to send me love letters again. Jason began to look at me with even more disdain after that, which left me feeling upset. I asked Eric, "Does Jason not like me?" Eric gently smiled and asked, "Why do you ask? If he doesn't like me, then I won't marry him in the future." I learned early on that marrying someone who doesn't love you turns marriage into a tomb. They have their own world, while you're trapped in this tomb, living a lifelong tragedy. Just like my parents. Eric fell silent for a while and asked, "Do you truly like Jason?" I nodded. When asked what I liked about him, I couldn't answer. Young love is often so unreasonable. If Eric's gentle spirit was like a spring rain, then Jason's bold and wild nature was like a hot and intense wind on the plains. I wanted to chase after that wind in the wilderness. After a long silence, Eric lowered his gaze and said, "Emily, he likes you too." He hesitated for a moment before adding, "He is just a kid, after all." I couldn't understand why someone who supposedly liked me would tease me. I couldn't quite understand the way teenagers expressed their affections. Underneath the bookish facade, Eric's eyes lingered on the open textbooks. He finally spoke, "Everyone expresses their liking in different ways." I always believed in Eric's words. Without a doubt, I couldn't contain the tumultuous thoughts in my teenage heart. One night during a party at Jason's house, I discreetly sneaked away from the adults and knocked on Jason's window. Despite his casual nature, he despised being at those kinds of parties, listening to the adults' banter. That night, he opened the window, fully engrossed in his game, without even looking up. I nervously asked, "Jason, do you like me?" Jason's hand shook dramatically, causing his phone to fall to the ground with the game displaying, "Game over." I teasingly asked, "Why are you blushing?" Jason, through gritted teeth, asked, "Emily, are you a girl?" I replied, "Yes." He snapped, "Then act like a lady around me." I blinked and remarked, "You answer my question first." Irritated, Jason retorted abruptly, "Only dogs would like you," and shut the window. My heart shattered into pieces. I was inconsolable, crying under the covers. Young love and hatred can be too overwhelming. I was mad at Jason for the entire summer. On the day the college entrance exam results were released, Eric received an acceptance letter from a top university. I did okay on the exams, and with the extra points from the violin awards, I got into a decent school. Jason, on the other hand, was scolded by his grandfather. To reward Eric, Jason's grandfather arranged for a car to take us all to a vacation villa in the mountains. Without any restraints, we all went wild one by one. I drank alcohol for the first time. It was really awful. I wrinkled my face and tears came out from being choked. Jason raised an eyebrow sarcastically, "Is this all you've got? Trying to drink like others? I don't care what you think." "I'm not going to listen to you," I retorted. Arguing with Jason only worsened my mood. Out of spite, I drank more. As expected, I got drunk, danced crazily with friends to booming music, and fell into a deep sleep. During the earthquake, I thought it was just me feeling dizzy. Everything happened so fast, the earth shook, steel and concrete collapsed with a roar, screams echoed around me, chaos engulfing everything. When Eric rushed towards me, I couldn't even react in time. I could only see the beam collapsing and hitting the slim teenager's shoulders. When I woke up from unconsciousness, darkness surrounded me with no light in sight. Feeling pain all over my body but unable to pinpoint where. I tried to move, but I couldn't, pinned down not by steel and concrete, but by the slightly warm body of the teenager. Eric. I couldn't move and tears flowed uncontrollably. For the first time, I strongly felt the presence of death. Feeling warm, sticky liquid dripping onto my neck, Eric's shallow breath fluttered above my head. "Emily, don't cry," Eric's voice weak. "You're bleeding a lot." I cried harder, afraid he would die. I could feel his pain, his body trembling uncontrollably. But he kept smiling to reassure me, "Don't be afraid. Jason will come to rescue us." Jason became a glimmer of hope for us. In despair with that hope, we confronted death in the darkness. Eric said, "We can't fall asleep." So we talked a lot. In the end, I couldn't remember everything we said. I only remember Eric's weakening voice. Like whispers. Eric didn't make it until Jason came to save us. More than half of the survivors were rescued that day, Eric not among them. Rescue efforts were still ongoing, everything around me chaotic, my consciousness fading, not even feeling the pain. Faintly, I heard many voices, especially Jason's crying, lasting and poignant. The teenager's grieving was an avalanche. I thought, that day Jason shed all the tears of his life. Years later, he was carefree and never teared up again. I was in a coma at the hospital for a long time, missing Eric's funeral. Jason never came to see me. I later heard that Jason had moved abroad. Grandpa told me that before leaving, Jason knelt in the house for a long time. He stubbornly said, "I should have been the one who died that day." I never knew why Jason left suddenly that night, nor did I understand why Eric apologized. In that year, the three of us who thought we would never be separated were each taken away by the wheel of fate. Eric stayed forever at 18. Jason decisively left for a foreign land, for years, never setting foot back in his homeland. I often felt guilty, increasingly burdened with a sense of sin, willingly accepting the shackles of fate, savoring the collapse of life. Right and wrong became a long journey of redemption. Realizing tears were dripping, I wiped away the smudges on the photos again and again. Putting the photos back into the album, neatly packed them into the suitcase. It seemed that about 27 years of the past had become just a thick album in the end. Hardly anything was left. The gifts Jason had given before. Quietly displayed in the glass cabinet of the wardrobe, shining and invaluable. I leaned the violin against the cabinet at first glance. Only this violin represented half-hearted sincerity. I only took my clothes from the bridal chamber. Driving away, making a turn, Karina said cautiously, "It seems like Jason's back." I glanced at the rearview mirror. Jason had returned. The car stopped abruptly at the door, and he walked in quickly. I withdrew my gaze, saying, "Let's go." The next day, Jason's father called. Without extra words, he said, "Come home and see me immediately." The call ended abruptly. I held the phone and sighed softly. The servants had been asked to leave the house, and the silence was suffocating. I went to the study on the second floor and saw Jason standing at the window at the end of the corridor. He was still wearing last night's clothes, with conspicuous blood stains on his white shirt. His hands were bandaged, fresh blood seeping through. Despite the grim appearance, he showed no signs of disarray, with smoke curling between his fingers, his handsome face filled with a numb coldness after the storm. Hearing footsteps, he gave me a fleeting glance before closing his eyes without a word. I silently passed by, pushing open the door to the study. Jason's elders were all there, and the conversation abruptly stopped as I entered. In accordance with decorum, I greeted everyone. With my grandmother present, the situation didn't become awkward. She waved to me, "Emily, come and tell your grandmother why you suddenly want a divorce." "Grandma, it's not sudden." I poured her a cup of warm tea as usual, gentle yet firm. "You know, I wouldn't bring this up lightly. Tea doesn't cool instantly, and neither do people's hearts." With a clear insight, my grandmother persisted, "Have you made up your mind?" I feared she worried about property division issues, adding, "Don't worry, I don't want anything. It's not about money." She waved her hand. "Jason has been reckless these years, but you and him have known each other since childhood, and you've been married for years. I thought you'd overcome any fights, but who knew? I find it somewhat amusing. Jason was carefree, but with his status and unparalleled business acumen, his flings seemed inconsequential. Everyone was forgiving, he was favored by all. Jason and I were never equals. I couldn't show emotions, couldn't have personal feelings, otherwise, it was all wrong. Seeing me silent, she then tactfully brought up emotions. I've watched you grow up, and in the years you've been married into our family, you've been filial, gentle and proper in everything. Grandma really can't bear to part with you. I lowered my eyes, unconsciously fiddling with my fingertips. In the past, we didn't cherish certain people, but now, we can't bear to let go. Grandma, take care of yourself. This is where I stop. With a deep bow to everyone, I turned and walked away. At that moment, the door was suddenly pushed open, and Jason walked in with a cold expression on his face. He didn't look at me, but as we brushed past each other, he tightly gripped my wrist, squeezing with unusual strength. I looked down at his hand, more blood seeping through, thoroughly saturating the bandage. His words were directed at others, but they struck a chord in my heart. Don't bother, I'm not getting a divorce. Under his intimidating presence, no one said a word, and the silence was deafening. Jason's lips curled slightly, almost a smile, but his words were chillingly cold, unless I'm dead. By the end of that day, Jason's father was so furious his face turned purple. He grabbed Grandma's cane and ruthlessly struck, the blows landing heavily with a dull, bone-crushing sound. You are courting death, and now you're the one facing life or death. How did I raise such a fool like you? Suddenly, I remembered the scene from our wedding day, reminiscent of what was happening now. But this time, I didn't rush to protect him as before. Instead, Jason turned slightly, as if shielding me. He bit down on his lip, not a sound of pain escaping him, not a word of surrender spoken. I think, Jason is still the same hard-headed person he has always been. In the end, it was Jason's mother who couldn't bear it anymore, clinging tightly to her husband to beg for mercy. I was escorted out of this drama by Jason. As we reached the door, I pulled my hand away, wrist stained with crimson blood. I wanted to say something, but thought better of it. Both of us remained silent, submerged in the weight of unspoken words. Jason raised a hand to light a cigarette, but his hand was trembling so much he failed several times. Unable to watch, I took the lighter and lit the cigarette for him. The flame flickered upon the cigarette's end, but Jason remained motionless, holding the cigarette loosened between his lips, staring at me for a long time. Eventually, he spat out the cigarette, crushed it beneath his foot, and sneered mockingly. Emily, you really don't care about me, do you? I furrowed my brows. This guy is something else, playing the victim. Many things are too complicated to explain, many words hold no significance. I had no intention of defending myself, so I chose to remain silent. Jason, waiting for me to speak, deflated like a balloon, his expression turning weary. Is everything packed up? He asked irrelevantly. I nodded. Everything that needed to be taken has been. There's nothing left except my personal belongings. Upon hearing this, Jason smirked sarcastically and taunted, is that how little I mean to you? To which I calmly replied, I just want to draw a clear boundary. Jason seemed to understand my intentions, his smile fading until it vanished. You didn't take anything with you. Turning his face away, lips curled in a self-mocking, lonely smile, he said, yet I feel like I have lost everything. I chose a good weather day, bought flowers, and went to the cemetery visiting my mother and Eric. Mother's new grave, weathered by many storms, was starting to grow moss on the headstone. People and relationships, no matter how close, eventually turn into isolated graves. Some stand outside the grave, while others rest inside. Eventually, everything converges and vanishes in this world. Love and hate reconciled. No need to linger, no need to cling. Standing still for a long time, I crossed the cemetery towards Eric. His grave had been renovated every year, and after 9 years, there were no signs of aging. But the young man in the picture will always be 18. I've been here countless times, talking to him about many things. The young man tenderly smiled as if truly listening to my innermost thoughts, but he could no longer ease my struggles or console my sorrows. I kept wondering, if Eric were still alive, what kind of life would he have led? Honored, with a happy family, surrounded by children and grandchildren, a fulfilling life. Such a kind and gentle soul should deserve that. But the most difficult thing in this world to understand is fate. That day, Jason asked me, "Why didn't you fight back?" Fight with what? Unable to shake off my guilt or find a solution to my pain, I whispered, "Eric, I'm moving forward now. Will you blame me?" The wind blew by. Eric remained silent, offering no answer. It was a prolonged farewell. I stood up, brushing off the dust. "Eric, I'm leaving now. I probably won't be back. Eventually, we all have to walk our own paths." Before leaving, I thought of Jason and said, "I'm sorry I couldn't honor your wish to be with Jason till the end." The currents of fate had scattered us. Each of us boarded a ship of uncertainty, no longer able to dock at the same shore. After standing quietly for a while, ready to leave, Mrs. White suddenly appeared behind me. Froze, my feet rooted in place. She carried pastries and placed them one by one at Eric's grave. "I knew I would find you here," she said without a hint of emotion. I nodded silently. Mrs. White fell silent, wiping Eric's photo with a handkerchief, even though I had already cleaned it. After a while, she finally spoke, her voice laced with exasperation. "Should I blame you for being foolish or for having a conscience?" I raised my head and Mrs. White gently caressed Eric's photo. My Eric was such a good child. He never wanted anyone to feel guilty about his kindness. A shiver ran down my spine. She knew everything. "I don't like you, not because of Eric." She stood up straight, slowly folding her handkerchief. "Jason, that child, always so willful, never truly opening up to us. I thought he married you out of obligation, unhappily, thus behaving recklessly. As a mother, I didn't wish for my child's marriage to be unhappy, so I held you in disdain." "I know," I replied sincerely. "I have never blamed you." She began walking downhill, and I quietly followed. "It was my misunderstanding of my son. It wasn't that he didn't like you, he liked you too much." Mrs. White sounded apologetic. I remembered some things from my childhood. It seemed that everyone preferred excellent children, even families like Jason's. Eric and Jason were twins. Family love had to be divided into two. Love is always biased. Eric's brilliance captured the attention of the whole family, while Jason's rebellious and unruly behavior was always unlikable and often overlooked. Jason, being naturally stubborn, became more difficult and untamed over time. After Eric passed away, Jason seemed to find his way back and took on all the family's expectations. Aside from some absurdities in his emotions, he seemed faultless in other aspects. Grandpa once said, Jason believed that he was the one who deserved to die that day. I guess he felt a heavy guilt towards Eric. Emily sighed. "The time I hit you, he got so angry he went to Africa to shoot wild deer in frustration. That's when I realized how silly that kid was." I recall those photos of him and Lily, and it's hard to distinguish between truth and falsehood. It seems like everything has become a deadlock. Mrs. White sensed my thoughts. "He probably wishes more than anyone that you can let go of that unnecessary guilt. Maybe he even thinks you still like Eric, so he has chosen the most foolish way to keep trying." She couldn't help but sigh. "On one hand, pushing you to resist and break free, on the other hand, acting like a child throwing a tantrum because he can't get candy, hoping that you'll look at him, eventually." At this point, even she, the proud noblewoman, made a plea. "Emily, as women, I know that there are things that can never be undone." She paused, put on her sunglasses before continuing, "But as a mother, I hope you can reconcile with him. That kid is stubborn, don't let him go down the wrong path." I could feel her choking up, and my heart felt heavy too. After she left, I walked along the mountain road for a long time. Many things came flooding back to me, including memories of Eric. Eric always said, "Emily, Jason is just a childish ghost." I think he was right. Jason has always been that way since he was young, saying one thing but meaning the other, stubborn and arrogant. Overly proud and equally stubborn. I think, if love has kindness, then love, too, should have been given. When I went to find Jason in our room, he was sitting in my dressing room. He was fixing the things he had broken before, one by one. I once heard someone say, the most helpless thing a person can do is to smash things in anger and then quietly fix everything they broke when they calm down. Jason glanced at me, then lowered his head, silently continuing his work. The bandages on his hands were already soaked with blood, but he didn't seem to feel any pain and I didn't know what he was so adamant about. I didn't speak. I went downstairs to get the first aid kit. Coming back and sitting next to him, I reached out to grab his hand, and he hesitated a little. Though I was prepared, my heart still fluttered when I unwrapped the bandages on his hand. "Doesn't it hurt?" Jason turned his face away and grunted, "Aren't you the one who doesn't care about my life or death?" His words almost made me laugh. "Jason, you're being unreasonable." When he heard me laugh, he turned his head, looking at me with a complicated expression. It seemed like we hadn't had a proper conversation in all these years. I cleaned his wounds carefully, smiling ruefully. From adolescence to marriage, we always seemed distant and close, entangled yet drifting apart. It was the nature of our personalities, and perhaps fate teasing us. We were like two crashing planes, heading towards destruction with no chance of recovery. Jason remained silent without denying it. My hands didn't stop moving, and I calmly said, "Jason, our marriage was a union, a debt, and above all, love." Jason jerked his hand back suddenly, clearly in disbelief. "Don't move." I pulled it back and smiled. "Have you forgotten? It was you who told me in the U.S. not to be greedy." Upon hearing this, he fell silent. It's difficult to express love, it wrenches your heart yet leaves you powerless. Jason tried to explain, but his voice came out hoarse. I gently removed his hand from mine and continued to tend to his wounds. "No matter your reasons, your actions cannot erase the pain you've caused me." For years, he stubbornly and repeatedly hurt others with his childish antics, piercing them with pain. Each trivial detail was enough to strike at the heart. After countless nights spent red-eyed and in agony, I learned to let go. "Jason, how do you define love?" "I don't know how to answer you. Should I start from when I knocked on your window at 17, or those 4 years of frequent trips back and forth between the U.S. and here? Or maybe it was the time you mentioned wanting to eat the noodles my mom makes, and how I flew thousands of miles to make you a bowl of noodles? Or should it begin with the times I searched for your eyes shining in the crowd these past few years? There are too many memories, too many stories to tell. I have never told him that I love him, but I have shown my love for him over and over again. Yet, he just turned a blind eye to it all. Jason turned his head, too afraid to look at me, his fingertips trembling. I smiled at him indulgently and said, "I know you don't want to hear it, because you already know." How could Jason not feel my love for him? He stubbornly believed that everything I did was just for the sake of his wife's status. Over the years, he repeatedly asked me if I was tired of pretending. How could I prove to him that it was not all an act? He seemed to have forgotten that even if I did nothing, my grandfather would still have let us get married. This marriage contract was his promise to my grandfather. Now, looking back, perhaps this engagement was a curse from the beginning. Jason and I were bound together. No matter what we did, it seemed natural to question whether it was out of duty or genuine feelings. Maybe I was also at fault. Over the years, my mother was bedridden for years, and the debt to Eric weighed heavily on me. As Jason pressed on, I also felt rebellious. Kindness turned into aloofness. Jason didn't look at me, he looked up, his eyes slightly red. "Emily, believe me, I have never liked anyone else. We have not been apart for over 20 years, and we won't be in the future either." He was so confident. Relying on our long-standing friendship, on the marriage cage he thought he had constructed, and on my tolerance and kindness towards him. He seemed to forget that Emily is a person. Her heart is not made of steel and concrete, it can ache, it can want to stop beating more than once. "But now, I have to let you go." I gently tied the last knot on the gauze. As I started to get up, Jason suddenly reached out and hugged me, burying his head deeply in my neck. A cold liquid seeped into my skin, the sound in my ears blurry and fragmented. "Is it that no matter what I do, you still want to leave?" I whispered to him softly, "Jason, I want to be Emily again. The vastness of the world is far from what I saw yesterday. Why be trapped in yesterday's entanglements? Jason always wanted me to break free from the cage, but he did not expect that the day would actually come when I would lose him too. He slumped, lowered his hand, and kept his head down, still refusing to let me see his eyes. All right. His eyelashes trembled, his voice hoarse. You should have always been yourself. I knew. This time, he won't make any more trouble. On the day of the beginning of autumn, Jason called. We agreed to process the divorce registration. But Jason was late. In the nearly 3 months we hadn't seen each other, he had undergone some subtle changes. Although he still had that careless and playful look when he raised his eyebrows, there was now a hint of silence and restraint in his long, narrow eyes. He lazily smirked. You've lost weight. This guy's eyes were truly sharp. In fact, I hadn't lost much weight, but he could tell with just one glance. It's almost time to get off work, I reminded him. In such a hurry? Jason raised an eyebrow slightly, then fell silent. Jason turned, half hiding behind me. The posture that seemed to protect me, but without any physical contact. This scene seemed familiar, and I couldn't help but think back to the day we registered for marriage. We had just graduated back then. It was Jason's grandfather who personally took us to get registered. Jason was unwilling, even warning me as we got in the car. Emily, think carefully, don't regret it. I remained silent, nodding without hesitation. During the wedding photo shoot, I was so nervous that my palms were sweating and my expression was stiff. We took several shots, and the photographer was not satisfied. Jason's restless fingers toyed with the ends of my hair. Why so nervous? When the shutter clicked, he mischievously put his arm around my waist. Emily, smile. I stiffened, my face turning red. The photographer was pleased, saying, that's it, that's how a bride should look. That photo ended up being fixed on the marriage certificate. With a light eyebrow raise, Jason smiled mischievously. I leaned lightly against his shoulder, looking shy with a twinkle in my eye. To anyone who looked at it, Jason didn't seem coerced, and to anyone who looked, we were a loving newlywed couple. In that moment of receiving the divorce certificate, Jason recreated that scene from our wedding day. Showing a mischievous grin, he said, Honey, I furrowed my brows. The stamp isn't even on yet. Did I get your name wrong? Jason shrugged innocently. Jason sent an invitation. Wanna grab a farewell dinner? I checked my watch, still had time. My treat, I said. For the wedding, I treated you, now for the divorce, you treat me. I led him through a small alley and into a small storefront. Low, old wooden tables, red plastic stools. Have a seat. Jason stood still. You've become quite thrifty. I reminded him, you brought me here on our wedding day. I always believe that everything should have a beginning and an end. Jason scratched his eyebrow. Seems like I did. He reluctantly sat down. The table was too low for him, being tall. His legs had nowhere to rest. He had to stretch them under the table, firmly planted. On one side of the small table, a man's long legs felt intrusive, brushing against my ankle and his suit pants. I leaned back, regretting bringing him here. The landlady greeted us warmly. It's been a long time since I've seen you two here together. It's been a few years, I nodded. On the day we registered for marriage, Jason said, let's celebrate with a meal. He brought me here. The landlady saw the marriage certificate he left on the table and offered her congratulations. Jason's expression was lacking, but there was definitely a hint of a smile in his eyes. At checkout, he even gave extra money. With a faint smile on his lips, he said, consider it as wedding candy. You two have been married for so many years. Do you have children? The landlady was overly enthusiastic. Jason playfully smirked, didn't say anything. I truthfully replied, just got divorced. The landlady was shocked, stunned for a while. She didn't dare ask further and changed the subject. Same order as usual? When the landlady walked away, Jason asked, have you come here alone before? No, I replied without thinking. Actually, I had come here before. But I didn't want to admit how low I had stooped during that marriage as rumors of Jason's infidelity stirred up a storm. I sat here, lost and uncertain where to go, always recalling the day of our marriage registration, unknowingly turning it into a habit. Feeling sad, sitting here, bowing my head to eat the steaming noodles. Pretending the tears were caused by the smoke. Jason lightly tapped the edge of the table with his long fingers. You used to come here a lot during those years of marriage. How did you know? Jason wanted to laugh but didn't, not answering. I didn't ask further. Not all questions have answers, not all questions need answers. Jason and I belong to the latter. Coming out of the small restaurant, walking along the narrow and winding alley. Jason suddenly said, "This place is about to be demolished." There was a hint of regret in his tone. I remembered, Jason has more emotional attachment to this place than I do. Back in high school, he first brought me here. We had 2 bowls of noodles, and while the owner was busy, he left the money and walked away a stack of red bills. 2 bowls of noodles cost so much money. I couldn't understand. Jason covered my mouth, half dragging me, half carrying me away. I found out that the owner's child has muscular dystrophy and has been shuttling back and forth to the hospital. After that, we would often leave money and run away. One time, the owner chased us for several blocks with the money in her hand. I thought, I like Jason not only because I yearn for freedom and want to chase the strong wind, but also because, despite his wild appearance, he is a soft-hearted guy. You wouldn't still be thinking about the owner repaying you, would you? To avoid a somber atmosphere, I teasingly said to him. Jason glanced at me, looking down on me. Only you could come up with that. We teased each other all the way, bringing out embarrassing stories from our youth to mock each other mercilessly. As we arrived at the end of the alley, Jason took out a neatly wrapped violin from the car. Afraid I wouldn't accept it, Jason smirked carelessly. I've accepted your gift, so you have no reason to refuse mine, right? Without even mentioning the divorce agreement, he even brought the divorce certificate. I reached out and took it. Thank you. Polite. Jason scratched his eyebrow. I remember when you were 15, you said you would carry your violin and step onto the international stage. You still remember that? I chuckled. Full of youthful spirit, fearless of distance and challenges, vowing to let dreams shine like the moon in the sky. Later, I discovered that in this world, dreams are scattered all over the ground. Jason lit a cigarette and looked at me. I remember everything you said. Pretending not to understand his words, I countered playfully, Jason, you have quite the memory. Indeed. Jason cooperatively raised his eyebrows in a haughty manner. In a daze, we were back to our teenage years again. Jason held his arms, a cigarette between his fingers, and remained silent for a long time. I saw the shallow scars crisscrossing his left hand, and a wedding ring still on his ring finger. Sensing my gaze, Jason turned his hand to look. The wedding ring. Actually, I really didn't want to pay attention to this. Just one quick glance, and yet he still caught me. Not knowing what to say, I simply made a sound. Taking a deep drag of his cigarette, Jason said arrogantly, I promised you freedom, but I never promised not to chase after you. I knew it was impossible to have any result, so I just smiled and said, you won't catch me. Jason took a deep drag of his cigarette, and the white smoke floated into the night. He arrogantly said, Emily, no one dares to take my place. Indeed, Jason had the capital to be arrogant. Karina's call came at the right time, and I turned to answer it, shifting the conversation away from Jason's topic. I've arrived. As the voice came through the phone, I saw Karina's car on the roadside a little distance away, flashing its hazard lights. Got it. After putting my phone back in my bag, I turned to Jason. I have something to do, so I'll go first. The wisps of smoke blurred his silhouette, and he just nodded slightly. I wanted to say goodbye. Then I thought, it wasn't quite appropriate. So I silently said in my heart, Jason, take care. Karina's car couldn't stop for too long, so I ran over with the violin in my arms. As the car drove off, Jason was still standing in the same spot, finishing his cigarette and then lighting another one. I withdrew my gaze and slowly closed my eyes. That night, I boarded a plane heading towards a distant place. During the long flight, I suddenly became curious and opened the violin case. To my surprise, besides the violin, there was something else inside. A bank card and a safety talisman obtained from a temple. There was no password on the bank card, I could guess it, but I probably would never use it. I looked at the safety talisman. There were 4 words on it, safe and smooth. Turning it over, there were 2 engraved lines of small words. Emily. Jason. I silently stared at it for a while, and then put the bank card along with it into my bag. That night, while high up in the sky, I had a dream. In the dream, the familiar tree-lined path was still long and quiet. The setting sun cast a mottled light through the treetops. At the end of the road was a sea of oranges. Young Eric was carrying his backpack obediently, while young Jason slung his backpack carelessly over his shoulder. I kept running towards their backs, shouting, "Wait for me." Eric turned around with a gentle smile and said, "Emily, slow down, I'll wait for you." Jason didn't even turn his head. When I caught up with him, he frowned disapprovingly. "You're running so fast, are you in a hurry to be reincarnated?" I complained to Eric, "Eric, he's bullying me again, don't bother with this childish ghost." I made a face at Jason triumphantly. Jason's frown deepened. "Emily, you're an idiot." He grabbed my braid, I ran away, and he chased after me. Eric was far behind, watching us with a smile. In the end, even youthful friendships will find it hard to blossom together. 1,000 miles apart. No reunion day. So, Jason. No need to frown. No need to be sad. Everything will eventually pass. Epilogue. Actually, Jason knew. That day at the end of the alley was the last time he met Emily. She wouldn't be coming back. Jason abandoned the car and walked alone on the long street at night. He thought of many things. When he was very young, adults pointed to a pretty girl and teased him, "That's your future wife." From childhood until now, his and Emily's names have been tied together, with a fate decided early on. He knew very early on, he liked Emily. That kind of liking was openly acknowledged by everyone, a bright and openly blessed one. Childhood sweethearts, no doubts, a happy ending. This was the life he wanted to give Emily. But how did it come to this point now? Jason thought, maybe it was the trip after the college entrance exam when Emily got drunk and Eric carefully kissed her cheek. Or maybe it was after Eric passed away, and Jason found in Eric's diary full of his silent love. Jason would regret all his life for the night he left in a huff. If he hadn't left, it would have been him buried in the ruins with Emily, not Eric. And the one who died would be him, not Eric. Emily wouldn't have to feel indebted to Eric. Perhaps Emily's debt to Eric also mixed with emotions, making it extremely heavy. When he was young, Jason overheard the adults sometimes joking. They would say, "Look at Emily and Eric, their personalities suit each other better." They lamented, if only Emily had chosen Eric at the beginning. In Jason's heart, there was a scar that grew into a wound. He just thought that a living person could never surpass a dead person, especially when that person was his brother. Jason was always persistent. His Emily should have been that proud and somewhat delicate, charming girl who smiled brightly. She should have been the talented violinist holding a violin, shining on the stage. How he wanted to help her escape the cage of fate, but he didn't know how to start. Jason, childishly, used the most direct and shallow way. He frivolously and clumsily navigated through the romantic world to test and press closer step by step. Testing if she truly had any feelings for him, pressuring her to let go of the shackles of fate, the thoughts of Eric, and the guilt. Those involved were confused, and bystanders dared not speak. As he walked further down this absurd path, it seemed to have an effect. Emily really became free, and she really lost him. Late into the night on the long street, Jason felt his eyes were a little sore when the wind blew, tears almost came out. He walked for a long, long time. As if he wanted to live out his whole life. He knew Emily wouldn't come back. He couldn't find her either. In the end, Jason remembered. During those 4 years in the United States, Emily came to see him once. A girl who had never done anything out of line put on a super short skirt and got on his motorcycle. He deliberately scared her. You better not, if you fall and die, it won't be pretty at all. She was most afraid of being ugly. But that day, the girl stubbornly held on to his waist. Dying with you is not impossible. Jason couldn't help but think. This girl is so strange. She's willing to die with him, but she doesn't want to be with him.